Hi everyone, my name is Matt Williams. I'm a tutor in politics here at Jesus College, the University of Oxford. I brought you to our lecture theatre so that I can share with you a past interview question for psychology. The question is this: what is normal? It's an amazing question. It's just 3 words long, but there's so much richness, so much depth to it. So how might you tackle a question like that in an Oxford interview? Well, as with any interview question, start by answering it honestly and clearly. Now, what do I mean by honestly? Well, tell us what you think the answer to this question is. What a lot of students mistakenly believe is that in an Oxford interview, we want to see you demonstrate how much you know. We want to see you show off that you've read loads and loads of stuff. And that's a bit of a mistake because we're interviewing you, so we want to know what you think about the question. So don't be tempted to describe what you think very noted, very famous psychologists might say in response to this question. Tell us what you would say in response to this question. Now, what you might need to do therefore is to start thinking out loud, because it's a really complex question. What is normal? Normal is a word that we use on a day-to-day basis, but we rarely actually pin it down with much clarity. So start by just saying what's initially coming to your mind. That's absolutely fine. What we're doing in an Oxford interview is we're recreating the teaching method we use. So very small teaching classes called tutorials, where we teach in groups of about 2 or 3 students at a time. And in those tutorials, you and the tutor work together to try and solve really complicated puzzles, and that's exactly the same thing in the interview. So just start by trying to solve the puzzle. Try and work out whether or not we could, let's say, measure normal, and we could therefore identify more or less normal behavior, more or less normal decisions, more or less normal thoughts, etc. Okay? You might be tempted after a while of thinking this that normal can't be objectively measured. We can't come up with some sort of metric whereby we could say that this behavior, this decision, this thought is X% more normal than that behavior, that decision, that thought. And then you might sort of go on to suggest, well, if we can't measure more or less normal behavior, let's say, then maybe it is completely unknowable, and that what we describe as normal is often asserted. In other words, it's what maybe quite powerful, quite influential people determine is normal. So therefore, normality is kind of socially constructed, that it's sort of arbitrary, and that what we consider to be normal is completely contingent on context. In other words, where you are, when you live, that's what determines what is more or less normal in terms of the operations of our mind. Now, you wouldn't be expected to come out with all of that on your own. As I say, the tutors in the interviews are going to try and help you analyse this question, because they're trying to recreate the way we teach. So just go with them and start talking out loud, but at all stages, express yourself. Tell us what you think the answer to these questions are. Okay? In order to develop your thinking, the tutors may also introduce some new information. So they might, for example, suggest that there could be ways of gauging normality in the functioning of a mind by utilising, let's say, some statistics, some mathematics, right? So they might, for example, tell you about how we may use a normal distribution. A normal distribution looks like a bell-shaped curve, where the mean and median are equal to each other, and the fattest part of the curve is on top of that mean or median. So most observations would sit there, and then it tapers out to slender tails where there are fewer and fewer observations. So for example, take height. I am the average height of a man in the United Kingdom. I'm 5'9". Sorry, I don't know what that is in metric. So I have the average height. I'm at the fattest point of the bell-shaped distribution. And if I was, let's say, 7 foot tall, I'd be a very thin tail. So we might be able to say that my height is not normal. I mean, the word abnormal has sort of negative, pejorative connotations. I'm not sure I'd necessarily call someone abnormal for being very tall, but anyway, we can park that particular debate for a second. So anyway, we could potentially propose a mathematical way of assessing and identifying more or less normal things. And so the tutors, having sort of introduced that possibility to you, would then want to gauge your thoughts. And again, they're really interested to know what you think. So just tell them. Don't assume that what they're telling you is what they think the correct answer is. They're not trying to sort of steer you in a particular direction. They're trying to gauge how your mind works. So you could be tempted to say, yeah, that's all very well for height, but how on earth are you supposed to measure, let's say, a decision or behavior, which is way more complex? You know, how would you even come up with some sort of distribution of observations? How would you measure a behavior like that and then start to distribute it along one single axis, that seems to be monstrously difficult. And then even, let's say you could do so. Let's say we came up with some sort of measurement of anger that was somehow getting close to being able to come up with observations of relative extremes. How could we then distribute it along a single dimension? And how could we draw lines? How could we say, well, this degree of anger is normal, but if you step over this little magic line that we've arbitrarily drawn, it suddenly becomes abnormal? Hopefully you can see how terribly difficult it is to understand, to measure, gauge what is normal. Now, as the conversation and the interview comes towards a close, the interviewers might start to gauge whether or not normality is knowable at all. And they might sort of pose to you the problem that if we conclude that we cannot know what normal is at all, we cannot even sort of have a basis for agreement, then we may not be able to perform psychology, right? The whole discipline could crumble, because if we don't have any sort of basis for understanding what is normal operations of the mind, we can't generalize, we can't infer about the operations of the brain across societies, across the whole human race potentially. And so that poses a whole disciplinary challenge. Now, what they would therefore gauge is whether or not you think there is some basis, there is some sort of foundations that we can work from. We may not know what it means to be normal. We may not be able to conclude that we know exactly what is normal, but we may have something, some sort of credible basis for having at least a discussion about these things. And that's pretty much the nature of all natural sciences. There is an awful lot that we don't know with any degree of certainty, but there is enough to get us going. There is enough to make sure that planes don't fall out of the sky. There is enough that we can drive over bridges and not feel too disturbed about it. But there's an awful lot we don't know. And therefore there's a need for a great deal of humility in the practice of sciences, that there's an awful lot that we cannot know, we do not know. And therefore describing certain behaviors as obviously normal is actually potentially quite dangerous, because that's simply not fully knowable. Anyway, let me know what you think. Also let me know what you think about these relatively short interview videos. I'll be happy to make some more if you like them. Give me some comments in the description, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks so much for watching. All the best now. Bye bye.